Hello fellows and welcome to Sonnet Sisters. I am Jennifer.
And I am First Impressions Jennifer, from the past.
And in this episode we are analysing Shakespeare's sonnet number 30.
What was he on about? That body, mister, come figure it out with the Sonnet Sisters.
When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow for precious friends hid in death's dateless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe, and moan the expense of many a vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of fore bemoaned moan, which I new pay as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored, and sorrows end. I'll be honest, I didn't pick much up as I was reading it through the first time, and there was just one bit that clued me into what's going on.
I didn't really understand most of what I was saying. Basically, the whole meaning of this sonnet I only got from the last two lines, the couplet. That was the only clue on first reading that gave me a really clear inkling of what this was about.
And sort of overall, I managed to glean the following.
There's a general feeling of thinking about what you don't have, the things that you lack, mourning for that which you don't have.
Oh yes, general is the operative word. We are about to find out just how general this thing gets. At this point in the proceedings, I would usually go through all the different words that we might not understand today that sort of Shakespeare used at that time that we don't use anymore. But in this sonnet, there aren't really very many of those. In fact, I'd say there aren't any. There are words that we do still use today, but some of them do have a slightly different meaning today than they would have done back then. However, I'm going to save those words for when I talk about imagery, but you don't really need to know the specific meaning of those words from that time to be able to get a clear idea of what is going on in this sonnet. Reason being,
there's a lot of repetition of the same type of words, of things like sigh, woes, weep, moan, grieve, grievance, sad, heavily bemoaned moan, all of that kind of stuff, which even though I hadn't sort of really thought on it, the very fact that those words were constantly repeating gave the idea of when I'm super sad about stuff from the past, I think about you, and then it doesn't feel so bad. That is the general gist of this poem. That's basically all you need to know.
Yep, you don't need to know much more, and you don't get to either, because he doesn't really expand on any of these ideas, but just like repeats them over and over in slightly different and not necessarily more interesting ways. In fact, if you boiled each line down to its essentials, then lines 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 11 and 12 are all basically saying the same thing, which is, sometimes I feel sad now for things from the past. Which is why when I came to the end of reading this sonnet the first time, I said,
my general impression of it is it's just a bit samey and drilling the same point without any extra flourish. Tonally, I guess, it's very Morrissey.
The first time I read this through, I picked up on the kind of money, financial imagery and words that was coming through, but I missed out on one extra element of that, which is that yes, there is money and financial imagery in here, but it's kind of within a legal framework. Like, say someone's been taken to court for a loan they haven't paid back, or a big debt, or maybe like a mobile phone contract, or your gas or electricity bill that you haven't paid. Although those are obviously like modern equivalents. At the time, it would have been field tax or donkey fees or carrier pigeon contracts. Look, I never promised to be an expert on context, okay? Okay, never promised to be an expert on anything. I just like words, okay? I just really, really like words. I don't know the history stuff. Get off my back, I just like words. Oh, speaking of words, here is all the donkey tax stuff. Line 1, session, so that just means a court proceeding. You know, like, court is now in session. I enjoyed that too much. Line 2, summon. When someone has to go to court because they've been summoned. They've received a court summons. You must come to court, you've been summoned. You get the picture. Line 6, dateless. Now, this doesn't mean that you've been stood up outside the cinema. It actually means that there's not been a date stamped on it of any kind. Therefore, it's everlasting. You don't know how long it's going to last. So that's an everlasting night. Cancelled in line 7, pretty self-explanatory. It's a pretty clinical and official word for something coming to an end, like a cancelled cheque. Expense in line 8. The phrase tell o'er in line 10 is an accounting phrase that means looking through the books, looking through the accounting books for all the money that's coming in and going out, checking that everything's correct, that sort of thing. And if you've ever seen an American TV or movie that has a bank in it at all, then you would have heard the cashiers being referred to as tellers. And actually, ATM stands for automatic teller machine. So we still do use that phrase a little bit to do with money today, less so in the UK, but that is where that comes from. Account in line 11 is like a bank account or just going through your accounts, everything that's coming in and going out financially. And there is a deliberate double meaning there as well of account meaning like your story, like tell me your account of what happened, that kind of thing. Then we have pay and paid in line 12. And then in line 14, losses are restored. Oh yes, as a self-employed actor, I am very familiar with the losses column of my tax return. So this is another accounting term, although it does also have the double meaning of personal loss. So what this bit is basically saying is that all of the stuff in my emotional minus column, which, just like the minus column of my actual finances, is a lot, is brought back up to 0 just by thinking about you. So that's nice, eh? Okay, so that sorts out the general meaning and tone of the sonnet, which, to be honest, I find a little bit dull because it's such clinical language talking about a fairly emotional subject. Dull, that is, except for one specific line, which I am now obsessed with.
Then my eye, singular, so maybe just this one or this one. Which is your crying eye? Generally mine tend to cry together, usually. Is there a time when one cries? No, I don't know. The sort of Sinead O'Connor. He's got Sinead O'Connor syndrome.
This line baffles me. I really like the imagery of a drowning eye, but why oh why is it just one eye? If he wanted to keep things general, he could have kept the flow going by saying, then can I drown the eye? Sort of talking about the general, the eye. That's cool, that's a cool way of saying it. Or he could have said eine, which is a really pretty and nice way of using the plural and saying both eyes. Then can I drown my eine? Or can I drown the eine? Or he could have straight up just used the normal plural and said eyes, then can I drown the eyes? It still works rhythmically, but no, he has specifically chosen the singular eye to be crying from, and I just don't know why. As if that wasn't enough though, he then makes a bracketed excuse for this crying eye, saying that it is unused to flow. Oh, by the way, my eye is not used to having this happen. It's not normal for me. I'm not used to having this much water come out of my eye. Right, okay, mate. That's fine. But why did you feel the need to say that and undermine the vulnerability that you just had 2 seconds ago when you're usually fine about being open and vulnerable? Though actually, having said that, there is a general lack of vulnerability within this sonnet, because although he talks about a lot of different types of sadness, he stays very vague about what they are and doesn't ever really go into detail. In lines 2 and 3, he literally uses the word thing and things without saying what those things are. And then as the sonnet continues, he talks about woes, grievances, moans, without ever explaining what any of those things actually are. And then at the end, he lumps everything in together as just losses, just general losses, which if he'd explained a little bit more about what those losses are, then maybe at the end when he says all losses, we'd be like, oh wow, all of them? Oh god, yeah, that is a lot actually. But because he's been so vague, we have no connection to what these losses are. And therefore, for me personally, I don't much care that all the losses have been restored. So, the suggestion of being somewhat vulnerable without actually managing to, the slightly clinical language and the general depressed tone of this sonnet put me in mind of a certain paranoid android from one of my favourite books and BBC TV series as a child. So, this sonnet is going to be read by a robot. I know, maybe it would have made more sense or been more practical to have it read by an accountant or somebody who's lost their entire business and become bankrupt. But a robot's going to be way more fun. And by Zeus do I need some fun after this sonnet. So tune in next week to see the performance of this sonnet, and in the meantime, it's fare thee well from me.
And it's goodbye from Jennifer in the past. Rest you merry. Not like old Sinead O'Connor one-tier drowning Shakespeare. Why is it one eye? Why? That is the strangest thing about this whole thing for me.